All right, hello everyone and welcome to Corn Talk. My name is Yaelise Martinez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the program coordinator at Walker Center Point for the Arts. And we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to make quality art experiences available to all people. I will be the moderator and host this evening, and you will be able to see that Brenda, our co-host and tech support, please wave to the audience, Brenda. So I am pleased to introduce our special guest today, which is Cyndi Bergloff. Cyndi Bergloff grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and currently lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is Adwa from the Grand Traverse Band and the Grand River Band, where she belongs to the Thunderbird clan. Cyndi is a graduate of the American Indian Studies at UWM, where she additionally minored in linguistics. Her work in Indigenous language revitalization has brought her to St. Paul, Minnesota, where she teaches Ojibwe language in St. Paul Public Schools. Cyndi is an alumni of the Young People for Fellowship, along with serving with AmeriCorps from 2014 to 2016. Welcome, Cyndi.
Bonjour. Of course, I live on a busy road, so a lot of cars have to drive by. So before I begin, I do want to take a moment to say this. We acknowledge that in Milwaukee, we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigami, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
Thank you for that land acknowledgement, Cyndi. I just want to make a quick disclaimer that this talk may include sensitive topics, so if at any need you need to take a break, we understand. So for those of you who may not be familiar with WPCA, each year during WPCA's annual member show, a juror selects 4 exhibiting artists with outstanding work. These artists are awarded with a solo exhibition in our featured member exhibition gallery. The staff has curated a series of questions to pair with Cyndi's featured member exhibition. So let's begin with our first question. So Cyndi, how did quarantine influence your practice, and how has your artistry evolved over time?
Okay, so I think for me, what I really liked about quarantine is it helped me develop more of a solo art practice. So for me, I found that a lot of my art started because of mental health. So before, I used to find that I had this antsy body and I was always fidgeting with stuff. And what that, how that came out was that I would try to take on many different projects, but I didn't really focus myself very well. So what quarantine allowed for me to do is to develop a more focused artist practice by thinking about, okay, what are the messages I'm wanting to, what are the messages I want to relay out to community members? How do I want to develop a personal style? And I think a lot of people can really resonate with this, but the fact of you're on the news, you're on social media, and you just keep seeing these really cryptic doomsday news headlines, and it kind of weighs on you after a while. So I was able to redirect that energy from this doomsday feeling to creating mediums, creating art using mediums that were fulfilling to me.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to quarantine being hard on all of us and trying to kind of grapple with this pandemic, right? So outside of art, what other forms of creation occupy your life?
Ooh, so I would say the first thing that is a form of creation that occupies my life, and I feel like some of the folks who are pretty close to me are aware of this, but I love plants. I love plants so much. As you can see, I have a big old turmeric plant back here. I am very proud of the work that I'm able to do with plants and my little plant relatives. Here's another little one I'm very proud of, my little Pothos, I've worked very hard on getting her to be so bushy and alive. And for me, really looking at plants as a relative, something that I can tend to pretty frequently. And I'd say the second form of creation beyond art would be looking at language and ideas and disseminating these things. For me, language is really important because it helps me in so many ways. It allows me to really work on my mental health. It thinks about how I can interact with people around me in a good way. There's so many teachings that are deeply embedded in Ojibwe language. And I think for me, by learning Ojibwe language, I can think about these teachings and how is it I can pass it down to future generations. Because right now, like, the future can look really bleak for youth. So by teaching language, I can teach how our ancestors have overcome their own challenges and thinking about how is it that we as a community now can overcome our challenges.
And so for those of you who may not know, Cyndi worked here at WPCA, and we have a beautiful garden full of squash, thanks to Cyndi, who's always advocating for green spaces and food justice. And so I also kind of want to touch on the component of language, and, you know, language kind of being this abstract concept, right? Language is in food and dance. It's in the way that we embrace each other. And so I want to talk about your visual language. And I recognize that a lot of your pieces have a lot of texture to it. So could you speak more on that, Cyndi?
Ooh, yay! Yes, I love talking about texture on my pieces. I even have like a little sensory stone, which was, you know, one of the ones that's really similar to one of my pieces. And for me, a little history about me is I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so for some folks, you hear PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and you have this image of shell shock, or like the PTSD that a lot of veterans have, which is usually a one-time experience. And that is kind of how a lot of people imagine PTSD. But complex post-traumatic stress disorder is long-term experience trauma, multiple events over the course of a long period of time. So for me, that was food and housing insecurity multiple times in my life. And because of that, it was easy for my brain to drift off into dissociative episodes. Essentially, for people who don't know what dissociation is, it's essentially a daydream state. You're not quite here mentally, you're just kind of off in, as I describe it for me, la la land. Like, I'm just like, oh, you know, my brain's elsewhere. And it's normal for some people to do it once in a while, but over repetitive periods of time, it's not great for your brain. And so for me, I found that making art would help me recenter and focus myself. So really getting my hands into these textures, I found that it would help me focus on anchoring myself in the present world. And as I really started to consider myself as an artist, I really pushed myself to do that more and more and more. And so I'd say, especially in the last year or so, I've been finding mediums from my environment, such as harvesting clay myself, or using plants or shells from the local beaches that have washed up. And so using that has been a really good way for me to anchor myself into the present state. And by thinking about how is it I'm connecting myself to the land that I'm on.
When I hear you say anchor and art, and like, I just totally think that art is like a vehicle to kind of keep yourself grounded, right, to who you are and your environment. And so I resonate with that very deeply, and I've kind of seen you in your process. It's a beautiful thing to see. So speaking of like these mediums that you work with, which one do you identify the most with, and why?
So I think that the medium that I find that I have identified, or two mediums I'd say that I identify the most with, have been very tactile, hands-on. Once again, like getting my hands dirty and in there. And I think anyone who's seen me in a classroom, in a conference will laugh because they've seen this before. But I find that ceramics and beadwork are both really important mediums to me. So they are both really delicate pieces of mediums or pieces of works that I can create. Like you don't treat your beadwork right and it can fall apart really easily, or if you don't make sure that the clay is nice and solid, that it can fall and break. So it's really delicate. However, when you do take care of it well, it can last lifetimes, generations on generations. And I think for me, that's the really key part of why those are two of the mediums that are really important to me, because they're essential for passing on culture and community. When you do take care of it, you're able to tell the stories of your ancestors. You're able to show both like resilience and trauma, and be able to tell how we as a community have overcome many of our challenges.
So Brenda's sharing the screen right now of Cyndi's exhibit. So we've got her, well, if you want to walk into describing your art.
So do you want me to walk through and talk about my art, or do we want to go to the next question real quick? What are we thinking?
Yeah, so actually we can roll into the next question while Brenda shows us little clips of Cyndi's exhibition that's available online, and it's in the comment box down below.
Excellent.
All right, so we want to know, what is your favorite piece in your featured member exhibition?
So I would say it's hard to pick one favorite piece. So I may be cheating on this question a little bit, but I'd say my favorite series that I have in this collection is the Ningi Ijigug Dage Nasan or Nasawan. They said don't touch it. So the pieces that are kind of along this wall, like Brenda's showing us, are probably my favorite, and the piece that's like closest to my heart right now. And this series of pieces leans into discomfort that comes with anxiety, OCD, and bodily repetitive disorders. So when I was younger, I was told quite frequently, oh, don't bite your nails, don't touch imperfections on your skin, let them heal. And for me, the way that a lot of these adults would say these statements, it felt like they were asking me to ask them for consent to do these things to myself. And it just like felt very, I don't know, dictator-like. It just felt really uncomfortable and violating when people would point out like I was feeling anxious. And so interestingly enough, a lot of these people who demand that I would not bite my nails were the same people who would walk up to me, like if I was wearing some of my beadwork or if I had my hair braided, and would touch like my beadwork or my regalia or my hair without asking me. And that really frustrated me, especially reflecting back as an adult. And so I felt that now, like thinking about the teachings that my grandma taught me, my regalia is a piece of, the regalia that I have been gifted is a piece of who I am and my spirit and the spirit of the people who made it. Same thing with my beadwork. So if my beadwork is a part of my regalia, it's a part of my spirit. And I put my heart and soul into it. So what I ended up doing is I took the beads on these canvases, on these painted canvases, and beaded them into the aspects of what people are telling me not to touch. So everything from there are things people feel uncomfortable with. So everything from hair to pimples to fingernails. And it made me really like call to attention how these folks would ask me, would ask me not to do this stuff, but I have to expect the reciprocal. So now I have to demand that they ask me before they touch beadwork. And so I really felt that by using the beads, it showed people how uncontrollable sometimes these urges were. And I think in creating these pieces, what it really taught me, as I reflected a lot on this whole series, was that as I got older, I realized how I could demand that people ask my consent before they touch my beadwork, before they touch my hair, before, they do anything, with me, oh, can I give you a hug? Versus just, oh, give someone a hug. Oh, it's such a big difference. So I think for me, these pieces were a way for me to understand how to advocate for myself.
Cyndi, that's a really kind of powerful subject matter to explore and to be vulnerable and to share that with the world, I think is really beautiful. And so thank you for sharing that with us. I'm actually getting a little emotional. We know that you were a staff member here, and as the former program coordinator, this was a question you often asked our service learners. Now we want to know, if money or time were no object, what would be your dream project?
Oh, I honestly love how you turn this question back on me. It just is my heart and soul. And it's one of those things that I do love asking folks, is see where they want to go and what they want to do. And for me, I'd say that the thing that my heart has been set on for a while has been to try and find someone to allow me to pursue an apprenticeship or do research in traditional Anishinaabe tattoo methods and the history of Anishinaabe tattoos. So I know I've seen a lot of these anthropology and linguistic textbooks and these kinds of showing how Anishinaabe people have had tattoos, as a way to show who they are, but also tattoos were used for healing, which I think is really cool. So I would like to find somebody close to me. I mean, hey, if I have to travel, that'd be even greater. But find someone who would allow me to learn how to do traditional tattoos. So that would be one of the things I would love to do if money or time were no object.
Quite a few tattoos yourself, Cyndi, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I am currently, I think I have 5, and one of them I did myself. So it's my clan tattoo.
I know we've got a dream tattoo on the docket.
Oh yeah, we always joke, I'm gonna get the lobster cat tattoo, and sooner or later I'm gonna get the big old WPCA lobster cat.
I'm looking forward to seeing that come to fruition. Yes. So I want to close out with a final question for Cyndi, and then we're gonna open it up to the audience. So now we want to know what this opportunity has meant to you, and how does the experience of being a featured member translate into your work?
Ooh.
Your new work.
I'd say for me, this opportunity has meant a lot because, first of all, when I first started off as an intern at WPCA, a brief story time, when I first started off as an intern, I had a little toolbox filled with jewelry making supplies, beadwork supplies. And I remember Chella asked me, oh, do you make any artwork? And I was like, oh, I'm not an artist. I just make some jewelry here or there. And through a lot of encouragement, sometimes tough love from Chella and Oscar, I really got challenged to see myself as an artist. So finally, by the time I really started getting into my art practice was during one of the member show. And for me to be recognized as an artist by a juror was such a big deal for me. Like, I was stunned. So for me, it means a lot. It means that there's representation of Indigenous artists, and it's a wild thought to me. Like, I never would have thought I would have seen a Native artist centered in an exhibit. So to have a place like WPCA who showcases artists who tend to be underrepresented, that's so important and valuable. And the way that I find I'm going to be taking this to my current job now as an Ojibwe language teacher is the fact of, one, like, it's a really good way for me to build relationships with my students. A lot of my students are not, I don't know, they're having a hard time engaging with the classroom, it being virtual. And so by giving them the opportunity to, instead of learn language through, like, I'm going to lecture at them, we're going to learn it by drawing together. And that's been really fun. And using the imagery instead of using translation helps build better language retention for students. Also, it's really fun to just talk about art with kiddos. Like, they enjoy art in so many different ways. And so to hear like what students think of, you know, my color usage or my imagery usage and them trying to make meaning themselves is really cool. So I would say that that's how I'm applying what I've learned in the featured member exhibition. Also, I think it's really cool to be able to talk about Anishinaabe artists. So I didn't know that there are books that are focused on Anishinaabe art. And so I found one and I'm using it in a part of my curriculum. So talking about how kids can build their own future.
How can we not, I can speak to Chella, encouraging folks to create art and submit art. I'm going to be featured in spring of next year, which is really exciting, and it's kind of ironic that you're sort of passing on this torch to me, and we have this shared experience together. So it's been really cool to like moderate this conversation with you and kind of explore your journey being a featured member and your new journey as a teacher. So now, I guess I want to take some questions from the audience. If you want to drop them in the chat box, or we can have folks unmute themselves and ask Cyndi a direct question. Well, while we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I kind of want to revisit a topic that you had brought up about community art. So I want to know why community art is important to you and why others should advocate for it.
Yeah, I think quarantine has really made me think about this a lot more, especially. And I think there's a lot of ways to look at community art. For me, like, I know one of the things that I very much miss is beading circles. So the idea of getting together and working on beadwork together and sharing stories and being in community with each other, support each other. So that's one aspect of community art that I know people will look at. There's also the idea of everyone making like big pieces of art, like one piece of art together. And no matter which perspective you're looking at it from, I think Her Wellness Institute always does a really good way of talking about community and community healing, which their motto is illness becomes wellness when I becomes we. So the idea that by shifting our art practices from individual art practices to community art practices, especially for delving into these really challenging topics and these really challenging ideas, if we're in community, we are more likely to heal from these really challenging aspects of life. And I think in addition, like one thing that WPCA does really well is thinking about how is it we can challenge artists who do feel so isolated in the art world. Because for me as an Indigenous artist, like I was like, I don't see any other Indigenous artists around. But eventually I started meeting more and more folks like Valeria Tatera and even several of the interns who are alumni of the school that I student taught at in Milwaukee, and getting to meet them and hearing how Indigenous experiences are so varied, and thinking about how is it we can learn from each other's art. And so community art is, I think, so fundamental in my practice. And it means like the world because it leads to healing. Also, I know we have some of our newer kind of staff and service learners, if any of them have questions.
Hi, Cyndi. This is Hannah. I have a question for you.
Oh, Hannah, yes, of course.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how you have been harvesting your own clay and kind of harvesting your own medium for your art. Can you talk a little bit just about how that informed the process and what it added to the finished piece for you?
Yeah, I actually think I have one of my pieces. Let me go grab it. And here is one of my finished clay pieces. And I ended up actually, after it was all done, I ended up putting some of the unfired clay, like dust in it, because I just like the effect that it gave it. And this is either I can use as a planter or a little like coin jar, which is what I've been using it for. So yeah, the process of it has been really important because I feel that for me, like getting store-bought clay was fine, but I didn't feel as just like connected to it. Like there's something that as I started experimenting with different types of clay, so just the regular white clay, terracotta clay, the textures like weren't as satisfying to me. So like the terracotta clay, if you're working with it for too long, I find that it tears up my hands, it dries them out and tears them up. And that just was not a pleasant feeling. So I decided one day, like I was going for a walk one day and actually found a ball of clay on the beach. And I was like, what is this? What? And then finally like unpacked all the rocks from the outside of the clay and found that there was like a huge, like when I say pop can, like it was a solid pop can size of clay. And so I Googled it, started looking it up and found out that Milwaukee, like Cream City is the name of Milwaukee because of the fact of the bricks are made from clay from the lake, the local area. And so by harvesting this clay, I got to connect back to Milwaukee's history. Oh, it's scary. And I could then find ways to apply it in like a nice cyclical way. So turning like clay from the dirt back into a planter so the plants can still be connected to the dirt that they're coming from. And I think for me too, it's been special harvesting clay from local areas because it's connecting to my family. So it allows me to kind of root even deeper into my art. So I think it's something I'm still exploring. Like I found a huge clay deposit in my parking lot here at my new apartment. So I'm like, one of these nights I'm gonna go out there and just dig and try to get some of it.
Welcome back, Carrie. So we are at the point of the talk where we're asking Cyndi questions. So if you have any questions for Cyndi, the floor is open for you.
But I just really loved hearing about what you said about the clay and then turning it back into like a planter. So it's kind of like living its purpose still. And I just wanted to, it's kind of a broad question, but just like any thoughts you had on like Indigenous design or like just like stories, like encapsulating stories within like mediums, because you've done that with like beading and things like that. I was just curious your thoughts, just anything that came to mind or that like.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is starting to happen right now within the circles that I'm interacting with is I'm seeing a big resurgence of people, like first of all, like small businesses shifting from, you know, just getting some random designer from art school to like design their logos to finding like tribal specific designers to design different aspects of their their brand. And I think that that's been really cool. So I know a lot of folks here in the Great Lakes have been using Neben, I can't remember the last name, but it's I know that she's local to Canada, but the Great Lakes roughly. An Ojibwe artist who went to American Indian Institute of Art. And so it's been really cool to see like this journey of people shifting from like going like just to find someone who's really cheap and really quick to finding ways to take time and really collaborate with the people whose voices matter. And I think for me, seeing Indigenous design, like seeing like some of the stuff that you've been involved in, like has been really cool because it reminds me as an artist even to think about who are the people locally that I can turn to get more teachings. I know I've done that in Milwaukee and learning from James Kelly, an Oneida beadworker, and learning how to do raised beadwork, and learning the teachings that go along with that of, you know, what is the history of beads? Like they're like the glass beads that we know now are not rooted in like art practices. They're actually things that came across during the Columbian Exchange, and they were something that we learned how to use and shifted our beads from being bone beads to being these glass beads that are super vibrant and share these stories. So I think Indigenous design, it's one of those things of like, you could go on like hours and hours of lecturing in each of the mediums. And I know especially for you as you're exploring your plants and your language journey, and even like think about design and coding, like there's some really cool lessons and stories that you can share with others within that.
So always just blowing my mind.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So for those of you who don't know, so this is also Carrie Flack, and she is one of my closest friends. And when I go and present with young people she often is the person who I present with, co-present with. So I have a lot to learn from her about the other part of Indian country down in Oklahoma and like the challenges that are that often come up within the 5 tribes. I know one of the most common questions that I do get asked by folks is how I started beadwork. And that's always an interesting one. And I'll just like talk on that a little bit too, of like beadwork is one of those things that like a lot of people were forced to sit down and do when they were younger. And I think for me, it was one of those things of having a rocky relationship with my mom caused it to be hard for me to learn because she was the one who is Native and she didn't learn beadwork very well. But my grandmother did. And my grandmother is very close to me. And so for me, when I was growing up, I would sit and watch her and just watch her do beadwork, but never really picked it up myself until I was about, I'd say about 20. And when I was 20, I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to do it myself. I'm going to teach myself. I'm going to pick up a needle, some thread, some beads from Joanne Fabrics, and I'm going to learn myself. And oh, that was a rocky start, because if anyone knows anything about beads, the beads from Joanne Fabrics are not the same size. They are very inconsistent. So it's been trial by fire. It's been really good though, because as I've made all these mistakes, I've been able to learn lessons from each one of them. And that's been really fundamental in teaching me patience and teaching me how to be humble in the work that I do. And then like really learning how to celebrate those victories. So within my community, one of the teachings that we have is the first thing that you make of a medium that you're proud of, you give it away. And you give it to the person who's been like really important to you, who helped teach you that. And so that was a really valuable thing of gifting my grandmother like earrings and like giving more of these pieces to people who've taught me journeys along the way. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into beadwork and the lessons I've learned from it. So Carrie, that's a really good question because this one is kind of out there for me, and I want to dance. Like, I want to learn how to dance. Like, I feel like being a swimmer, being like someone who's like done like arts that are like, and doing practices that are very focused on the body. Like, I've done Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I've done water polo, very much like things that demand like body control. And for me, I've like always wanted to learn different mediums of dance. So like learning everything from like, I think it'd be cool to learn just some ballet, all the way to like going and learning traditional dances like fancy dancing or jingle dress dancing. And I wanted to go do fancy dancing for a really long time. But my grandma has basically told me, without telling me directly, but she's pretty much said, you're doing jingle dress dancing. That's pretty much your calling, and you're not doing anything else. If that's not the most Indian grandma thing ever. So the next question is, honestly, that's what I'm thinking too, is that I've been practicing a lot at home of just like, you know, trying to like feel the rhythm, like trying to understand like how does it work, and the teachings from my community along the way. So my art practice helped me build a community in my new city or job. Ooh, so it's hard to move to a new city when quarantine is happening, especially when you're moving from a state where people have so much COVID to moving to a state where nobody wears masks. So that's been a really big challenge for me, which has been like trying to find ways to meet people. And thankfully, like it's a blessing in disguise that I was so active on Instagram and that I have been, because a couple of folks had reached out to me who were followers of me in Twin Cities area, being like, hey, I saw you're moving up here. Like, let me know if you want to do a beading circle, a socially distanced one sometime soon. I know we've never met in person, but if you want to get together, I'd be down for that. So that's been one way of like starting to like learn how are the networks of people I want to interact with, number one. Number two is that I've been able to build community through the after school program. So I'm leading an Ojibwe Moen kind of advanced after school program, which is really cool. And I've been able to use art as a way to kind of teach students there. And I'd say finally, like, I was moving into this building and my neighbor who has a dog who had just gotten a puppy like the week before I moved in, like her dog like picked up something on the ground and it was a paintbrush that I dropped. And I was like, oh, she's like, where did he come up with this? I was like, oh, sorry, I'm an artist. I wasn't dropped it when I was moving in. And she's like, oh, you're an artist, blah, blah, blah. Well, that turned into a long-term like friendship that I now have. Like, I dog sit her dog probably 4 or 5 times a week. Like, when I'm having a rough day, I just go up there. I'm like, hi, can I pet your dog? Do you want to have dinner together? Like, and it's been really neat to like really build relationships based off of like this idea of like, oh yeah, I am an artist and this is what I do art on. And also allows me to open up the door to destigmatize the idea of mental health should be just push a corner, just shove it under the rug, like talk about it. So that's been really cool. And I see Haley just joined. Hi, Haley.
Hi, Cyndi.
We're just doing a little question and answer session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask it. I've been talking about my art practice and clay harvesting and language stuff. Yeah, Alex, I hope I answered your question pretty well. I'm still developing my community here. It's hard.
What's something you're missing right now?
Oh my gosh. I have a whole list of things. Oh, I'm missing the dogs back home, Baxter and Scouts. Oh, yeah, I'm missing a lot of stuff. Like, I didn't get to do my garden harvest at the end of the season. Thankfully, Jacob took care of that. That was really helpful. Um, Hold on. I need to show you something I'm proud of, though. This is thankfully, while I was missing it, I still got to see the fruits of my labor, which,
Wow, that's a big squash.
yes, this is my Gethea my old Ojibwe squash. It is like I'm so proud of this.
Oh my God.
I had this the entire time out so I could just hug it. And
This is beautiful. I need a screen grab of Cyndi hugging this.
Yeah. Please show us again.
What are the plans for that squash?
Huh?
What are the plans for that squash?
It's going to be made into squash soup, lots of squash soup. There is a second one, which was maybe a third of the size of this one. And I made a huge batch of soup with that one. So I'm going to make an even bigger one and just start like freezing it for the winter, for the hard days. So I'm missing my plants that I had there. And I think I just really miss the culture and community that comes with being in Milwaukee. Like, there's a bit of a cultural difference here in the Twin Cities, and it's taken me some time to adjust to it. Yeah, and I feel like I worked really hard since I moved to Milwaukee in 2013 to really build a community there. So it feels like I'm starting over, but I'm reminding myself that it doesn't mean that I'm disconnected. It just means I have family in more places, and find homes in more places. Yeah, there's a lot I'm missing, but there's a lot of things I'm starting to appreciate here.
Well, we certainly miss you here, Cyndi.
Yeah. Oh, WPCA is one of those places I talk about all the time. And I'm just like, if only the people here could understand how beautiful and radiant a place WPCA is.
I guess I just wanted to, if people aren't connected to you, where can they find you on social media?
So I'm active on Instagram, and my Twitter handle is Buffalo, as in the animal, and then knitter, like you knit a scarf. So Buffalo Knitter, and then my my Twitter is Bush Copy, BAASHKAAPI. Which means a person bursts out laughing. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's a person bursts out laughing. And I feel like that's very defining of who I am, of just always laughing and finding joy in every situation. And it makes me laugh because that was just given to me in a nickname as in my Ojibwe class. And as I'm reflecting, I'm like, most of my language classes, I got a nickname like that, or like my sign name in ASL is this, which means like I'm smiling all the time. So always finding the bright side in things. Yeah, and as Carrie said, I've always got beadwork. Yeah, I'm always making stuff. I currently am finishing up a commission right now for a wedding. Someone's gifting a piece of beadwork to a couple that's getting married. So I'm like, ooh, that's exciting. Yeah, so those are 2 ways that people can contact me or find me.
All right, and just a reminder, we did link Cyndi's interview in the chat box, and you can still see her exhibit online at wpca-milwaukee.org. So we want to thank Cyndi so much for letting us host, letting me moderate this conversation. And do you have any parting words, Cyndi?
I would say there's 2 things. Like, one, like, I so appreciate you all taking the time out of your day this afternoon or evening to come and hang out here. I know it's hard for people to be able to be engaged online, especially when they have like so many other meetings they probably have in the day. So I appreciate that. And my second thing, I would be doing a disservice to myself and the work I do if I didn't remind people, one, fill out your census. Two, if you can vote or you choose to vote, go vote. And if you don't choose to vote, that's all right. Just remember, use your voice. So if you want to go protest, make sure you're telling folks out there what you're passionate about. So use your voice for what you want to use it for.
Thank you again, Cyndi. Everyone turn their mics on and just give Cyndi like a big like, woo, like, or clap.
Yes.
You go, girl.
If you all aren't following WPCA, go follow them at Walker's Point Art. They are an amazing organization. Even if you aren't from Milwaukee, they do some really cool things. So if you want to bring some of the things that they're doing to your community, they have some good ideas on their social media. Well, thank you, Walker's Point Center for the Arts, for making this happen.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.